Welcome to a new daily top AskReddit video. Today's topic:
who are the evil people that won in history? Jimmy Savile. One of his victims once escaped him, ran into the lobby and shouted that Savile was attempting to assault her. The people there simply laughed and mocked her. Definitely one of the most sickening travesties and injustices in my opinion. So many people for decades knew they just had to, yet there was allowed to continue being left alone with and abusing countless children because of his celebrity. Fucking disgusting that he died happy, beloved, and without facing any repercussions for his abhorrent actions. People definitely knew. In his older years, hospitals where he worked had unofficial rules about not leaving anyone alone with him. BBC producers banned him from children in need. His knighthood request was blocked for years because of his character, or some other ludicrously British saying. He may have gotten away with it through death, but there are a lot of people still alive who got away with covering for him too. Shiro Ishii, the commander of Unit 731 and other facilities that performed medical experiments on human beings during WW2 in Japan. Surgeons would cut open someone without anesthesia, ripping off limbs, or tearing out body parts. They'd sometimes tie a person to a pole outside in the freezing winter and then pour cold water on them to speed up the process of freezing their limbs. Once completely frozen, they'd then smash the limbs off with a metal rod. Some of the most sickest, heinous shit imaginable. The part that angers me the most is that he, along with several others, were granted immunity in exchange for information and research. Got away free and never was punished. Clip to 1 hour 17 minutes and 6 seconds for an interview with a surgeon who worked in one of these facilities. https://youtube.be/akelvikudivig?C=pkajvoyu035g-. In Germany we have Ari Berheim, the butcher of Mauthausen, who was on a level with Mengele but never got prosecuted by the Allies. Worked as a gynecologist after the war till 1962 when he got tipped off about police at his home, so he fled to Egypt. On a level with Mengele but never got prosecuted by the Allies. Neither did Mengele. He died in 1979 having never been punished. Jong Il. He lived in the lap of luxury while the vast majority of his country lived in abject poverty. He got steak and lobster every night, expensive alcohol imported from all over the world, had a film collection of 20,000 movies including Western films that were illegal for anyone else to own, fucked any woman he wanted, was infallible and worshipped by the very people he was oppressing. That slimy little fuck enjoyed all of the luxuries imported from capitalist nations which were illegal for everybody else in the country. I hate that the interview was pulled from theaters and shown only on streaming because of fears of North Korean retaliation. Like, what on earth was North Korea going to do over a wide release of a movie in a separate country? Well, they hacked Sony for one. Similarly, Mobutu Sese Seko, president of then Zaire. He died in a luxurious exile in Morocco at age 79. He would have meals flown in from Michelin-rated restaurants in Paris on chartered flights of the Concorde, because regular airliners weren't fast enough to deliver it fresh enough to his liking. He even spent millions to build a new airport, as none of the existing airports had the 3-kilometer-long runway to handle the Concorde. The average citizen under his rule had an annual salary of less than $150, roughly 50 cents a day. A single passenger ticket on the Concorde is about $20,000 in today's dollars. Even for a dictator that is crazy over the top insane. The amount of greed and selfishness of these evil despots knows no bounds apparently. Joseph Mengele. The Nazi, Doctor of Death, who escaped Germany to South America, started a family and despite being hunted by the US, German and Israeli governments for decades, didn't even hide his identity by the end of his life. He drowned after having a stroke in 1979. At least Mengele's last few years were pretty miserable for him. He lived with a farm family that hated him and he died without accomplishing anything other than prolonging his miserable, empty life. If it makes you feel any better, it was his second stroke. This, along with his medical knowledge, meant it is highly likely that he knew what was happening to him as it was happening. He died the way all Nazis should die, honorless, alone, and afraid. Mengele wasn't actually a very good doctor. There's a good chance that he didn't in fact have the medical knowledge to know. All the atrocities performed by Mengele were actually carried out by Jewish doctors who he had enslaved. Slaves that were killed every 6 months. Mengele also wasn't smart enough to actually design the pointless experiments that made him infamous. Those were mostly requested by other German doctors and researchers at various German universities. There are still thousands of academic skeletons out there that came from Holocaust victims, supplied to universities by Mengele. Pol Pot got to die in his sleep in 1998. He deserved far worse. Whenever someone asks me if I believe in karma, I always point to Pol Pot. Dude was responsible for the torture and murder of millions of people, and got to grow relatively old and die in his sleep while not in jail. And then there's kids that die of leukemia at age 7. The universe is random and cruel. Pol Pot. He died in exile, if I remember right. Thought he died of old age in Cambodia. A lot of the Khmer Rouge were still in prominent positions till they died. The warden in charge of S21 is still alive to this day, imprisoned for life but still. Just gives you context for how recent the Cambodian genocide actually was. Edit. He died in 2020, just to correct my false information, point still stands on the recency though. Leopold II. Reading The Ghost of Leopold currently and couldn't agree more. Edit. King Leopold's Ghost by Adam Hochschild. I had a critical edition of Heart of Darkness, and about half of it was various writings of the Congo at the time Hod was written. Kissinger. The blood of countless millions is on his hands, and he remained an accepted and welcome part of American politics until his death. I feel like, at the least, the sentiment against him was extremely broad and constant. He never got his comeuppance, but the counterculture of America has been so vocal about what a dumpster fire he was that he was at least aware of what people thought of him for the past 55-ish years. He deserved worse, but I hope that that knowledge tortured him and he knew that his paragraph in the history books would never be without harsh criticism, even if the machine that granted him power continued to lift him up until his dying day. Well, at least he's dead now. Even if he's dead, he got to live a long life being worshipped by far too many people. He won. Death is not a punishment. All the Nazis who were absolved of their crimes through Operation Paperclip. Some of them would also go on to hold positions of government in East Germany. In fact, the Stasi consisted of many former Gestapo members. And the West too. After a while, the entire operation to cleanse Germany of Nazis was abandoned once the Allies realized there would be no Germans left. WB the Nazis that got to stay and now are some of the richest families in Germany. Quant's responsibility for staffing at battery factories in Berlin where forced and slave laborers were exploited. But it still omits Herbert Quant's involvement in the concentration subcamp project, his use of prisoners of war at his private estate and his help acquiring companies seized from Jews. Family owns BMW, worth 40 B. Man who voluntarily applied to the SS in 1938, was admitted as an officer in 1941 and lied about this for the rest of his life. During most of the war, Mr. Poche was busy leading the Porsche company in Stuttgart, which exploited hundreds of coerced workers. As Porsche's chief executive in the post-war decades, he surrounded himself with former high-ranking SS officers. In his 1976 autobiography, Mr. Poche gave a twisted historical account, full of anti-Semitic statements, about Porsche's Jewish co-founder, Adolf Rosenberger. He even accused Mr. Rosenberger of extortion after he was forced to flee Nazi Germany. Porsche peak family worth maybe 50 B. Friedrich Flick controlled one of Germany's largest steel, coal and arms conglomerates during the Third Reich. In 1947 he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for war crimes and crimes against humanity. At his Nuremberg trial, he was found guilty of using forced and slave labor, financially supporting the SS and looting a steel factory. After his early release in 1950, he rebuilt his conglomerate and became the controlling shareholder of Daimler-Benz, then Germany's largest car maker. In 1985, Deutsche Bank bought the Flick conglomerate, making his descendants billionaires. Grandkids were the world's youngest billionaires at one point. Pol Pot got to grow old after slaughtering millions. The answer is the Sacklers. There's still time. For the most part we'll never know because they are the people dictating the history books. It says here in this history book that luckily, the good guys have won every single time. What are the odds? Norm Macdonald. That's pretty much completely wrong and every historian is so bloody tired of this. History isn't written by the victor, it is written by historians. They literally search through uncountable sources to find out what is legend, lie and truth. No victor was ever able to erase every word about them that didn't fit his own version. We know this even of the old pharaohs of ancient Egypt. There are hundreds of examples where the bad guy won, just that bad guy is no term in history. Anyone who claims history is written by the victors paid very little attention to the historiography of the US Civil War and Reconstruction. Because that history got hijacked by lost cause mythologizers almost instantly. There are tons of examples where historians simply cannot tell what was smear propaganda and what actually happened, because the winners had complete control over the preservation and spread of information. Elizabeth Bathory, either the most prolific female serial killer in history, bathing in the blood of girls and women, or victim of a successful political strike that saw her imprisoned and dying of mysterious circumstances, while her family desperately fought to prevent the Hungarian kingdom and Transylvanian nobles from reclaiming her vast lands. Emperor Nero, similarly, was either a beloved emperor of the people to the point where multiple rebellions advertised themselves as Nero reborn, or he was a debauched tyrant of vile action. There are so many cases like this, where it is impossible to tell whether a person was evil or simply on the losing side. Similarly, you can see this happen in the modern day despite significant records. The US not having concentration camps, but internment camps is probably one of the most obvious, as well as the Luddites still being villainized, but the idea that history is a simple retelling of facts is very naive. Real historians need to dig through the biases and propaganda of their target of inquiry. Many times, that is impossible because above all, they need sources, and all other records were suppressed or unreliable. Agreed, it's wild that if the Nazis had won we would all be acting like they were the good guys and the Allies were the evil ones. Yeah, they did a genocide, but look at all the incredible developments they gave the region after. That's exactly what they teach kids about the USA, and that's what would have happened in Europe.